Okay, we are live. Hey, it's Jeff Melton with the Bitter Pill, um, and I am coming to you the night before the Rage Against the War Machine protests against the Iraq War, which is probably going to be the largest anti-war march we've had in a while. There are a lot of very well-known speakers speaking at it. So I'm hoping for a good turnout. But the reason I wanted to talk to you about it was that there's been an awful lot of controversy about it. And so basically, uh, the controversy stems from the fact that um, the Libertarian Party and the People's Party, which so far has not actually run any candidates, and there are certainly a number of criticisms from uh, people who've been involved with the People's Party of its some of the decisions that have been made, and I don't want to get into that. And certainly, many of us are not libertarians. I'm definitely not one, and I'm very critical of libertarian ideology in general. But I want to take a look at who the speakers are, what the demands are of the march, and what some of the criticisms have been. Uh, and basically, in a nutshell, although I think there are some legitimate criticisms of uh, how the march has been organized and so forth, I think it's going to be a positive thing for the anti-war movement. An awful lot of people I know and respect are going to be there, uh, or and in some cases speaking. So let's just take a look at first of all, uh, you know, what and just a brief overview of the uh, details of the march, and then what some of the criticisms have been, and then we'll uh, just discuss things in more detail. So, shoot, I didn't set this up. Sorry, let's see. Hold on, I'm gonna pause this if I can. No, I can't. Okay, never mind. Okay, there we go. Okay, well, let's talk about the demands being made by the organizers and of the Rage Against the War Machine March in Washington, D.C., scheduled to start at 12:30 p.m. tomorrow. Um, First of all, the demand is not one penny more for war in Ukraine. The Democrats and Republicans have armed Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars in weapons and military aid. The war has killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and is pushing us, possibly anyway, toward a nuclear World War III. Stop funding the war. Two, negotiate peace. The U.S. instigated the war in Ukraine with a coup against its democratically elected government in 2014, and then sabotaged a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine in March. That's March of last year, as well as the beginning of April. Uh, and there were peace deals before that, back in 2014 and 2015. There were uh, meetings in Minsk, Belarus, to negotiate a ceasefire and peace deal in the conflict that was going on in eastern Ukraine, or what at that time was eastern Ukraine, um, and the government in Kiev. And I'll talk about that in more detail later. But basically, um, there was an agreement made that would have kept uh, the eastern region of Ukraine, called the Donbass region, part of Ukraine, but given it autonomy, similar to what Crimea had in Ukraine prior to 2014, when there was a referendum and folks there voted to join Russia. Um, and um, if that had been honored on both sides, and uh, well, if that had been honored, then there wouldn't have been an issue, and Ukraine would have kept all the territory, with the exception of Crimea, that it had prior to this coup in 2014. Pursue an immediate ceasefire and diplomacy to end the war, the demand says. 3. Stop the war inflation. The war is accelerating inflation, increasing food, gas, and energy prices. The U.S. blew up Russian gas pipelines to Europe, Nord Stream 1 and 2. Excuse me. I'll talk about that in a bit. Starving them of energy and deindustrializing their countries. End the war and stop increasing prices. 4. Disband NATO. NATO expansion to Russia's border provoked the war in Ukraine. NATO is a warmongering relic of the Cold War. Disband it like the Warsaw Pact was disbanded back in the early 90s when the Soviet Union dissolved. Excuse me, I may have to get a drink here. I'll see if this scratchy throat goes away. Something must be setting off my allergies. Anyway, 5. Global nuclear de-escalation. The war in Ukraine has brought us to the edge of World War III, a nuclear war with Russia. U.S. intelligence agencies estimate a 1 in 4 chance of nuclear war, which would plunge the world into nuclear winter and kill almost all life on Earth. Adopt a no first strike nuclear policy. Draw down nuclear weapons worldwide. And as you may know, back in the 1980s, there were a number of major nuclear arms treaties negotiated between the Soviet Union and the United States. And among them the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which contributed to withdrawal of nuclear weapons by each side that could hit the other country in a very short period of time, as well as not trying to gain a first strike capability by building up missile defenses to the point where not very many of the other side's missiles could get through, but yours could get through more. And anyway, the reason I mention that is that the U.S. Left both of those treaties that I mentioned, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. I can't keep straight which happened first, but one was in the early 2000s, abrogated by the Bush administration, and then in 2017, the Trump administration took the U.S. out of, I believe it was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So we need to get back to arms control. Slash the Pentagon budget. Half of the federal discretionary budget goes to the Pentagon. The military budget is $857 billion per year, and the Pentagon just failed its 5th straight audit. The Pentagon can only account for 39% of its $3.5 trillion in assets. Cut the military budget in half and return those funds to the American people. 7. Abolish the CIA and military-industrial deep state. The CIA and deep state are an unelected permanent government of intelligence agencies that run our country outside of constitutional and democratic control. Okay, I'm going to try and cut this a little short here, but I'll certainly put the link in the video and you can read it, but I'm just going to read the headlines here. Abolish war and empire. And basically it talks about all the wars that the U.S. has waged or supported over the last 2 decades. It's an enormous list, and in fact, Benjamin Norton did some research recently where he discovered that there were approximately 500 U.S. military interventions over the course of U.S. history, either direct or funding proxies, etc. And half of those, approximately half of them, have taken place since the early 90s when the Soviet Union dissolved. End all U.S. wars and regime change, stop all military aid to other countries, end drone strikes, close all U.S. military bases abroad, bring all U.S. troops home. Build a world that guarantees every person freedom from war and empire in place of the collapsing U.S. hegemonic world order. I'll just go ahead and read them. 9. Restore civil liberties. Restore the constitutional liberties taken from us in the name of war and empire, including freedom of speech, the press, and assembly. End mass surveillance. Repeal the Patriot Act and restore the right to privacy and habeas corpus. 10. Free Julian Assange. The U.S. is charging Julian Assange with espionage and criminalizing our right to publish information that challenges the military-industrial deep state. He is imprisoned in the UK and being extradited to the U.S. The CIA plotted to assassinate him for exposing U.S. war crimes. Free Julian Assange and all political prisoners. I guess for the sake of brevity, they mentioned the best known political prisoner here. But as they acknowledge, there are many others. Mumia Abu Jamal, for example, a former Black Panther. Many others. So anyway, I don't know about you, but to me those seem like very reasonable demands, and I don't see anyone who is truly anti-war, which, let me make this clear, anti-war does not necessarily equal pacifist. I personally am not a pacifist. I think sometimes wars, waging war in self-defense is like, it's a necessary evil. Nobody in their right mind wants war, but sometimes, unfortunately, it has to happen. World War II, for example, was unavoidable. Okay, let's look at the speakers. Quite a list of well-known speakers here. Jimmy Dore, the stand-up comedian and YouTube political commentator. Most of you probably know who he is, but you can click there for more information. Ron Paul, former congressman of Texas, author, physician, and a premier advocate for liberty, it says. Well, he's like the best-known figure in the Libertarian Party, which I certainly have my problems with as far as their politics are concerned. They're basically ultra-capitalist, free marketeers, but they also are often against most, if not all, wars, and they have strong stands on some aspects of civil liberties. So if we look at Mr. Paul, for example, he was he served as a Republican in Congress, and he took some typical Republican stands. Advocate for fiscal responsibility, low government spending. He was against most U.S. military interventions. He was also quote unquote pro-life and pro-family values. So he's anti-abortion and certainly some other stands that I probably don't agree with. But he consistently voted to lower or abolish federal taxes, spending, and regulation. Used his House seat to actively promote the return of government to its proper constitutional levels. So, reducing the size of the federal government, including the military. Okay, certainly a mixed bag, but You can't say he's a warmonger. That's for sure. Tulsi Gabbard. Most of you if you're in the United States, you probably know who she is. She's a former congresswoman from Hawaii. She does serve in the military, which is and has you know, for about 20 years, which is certainly controversial for someone who's deemed to be anti-war. But I've talked about her before. Back when she ran for president in 2019, I did a number of segments on her and basically pointed out that you know she's a mixed bag politically, but she's taken a number of strong progressive stands that I agree with. So, for example, she was the only person in Congress to, and has since also been the only person to consistently stand up in support of, excuse me, Julian Assange's freedom, as have all the speakers that I know of. And it's one of the demands. In general, pro-civil liberties, anti-censorship, supported reintroducing the fairness doctrine, um, pro drug legalization, and opposed basically every U.S. military intervention that occurred during her time in office, and has been a very outspoken critic of the U.S. Proxy war in Ukraine. Dennis Kucinich, you probably know who he is if you are in the U.S. and have been following politics for a while. He was a congressman from the state of Ohio for a long time, and very very progressive, consistently anti-war, always voted against the military budgets. I have my criticisms of Dennis and everybody who's ever served in Congress, but he was definitely one of the better ones. Cynthia McKinney, former congresswoman from Georgia, she was run out of the Democratic Party because of her strong, outspoken stance against U.S. support for Israeli apartheid, and she subsequently ran as the Green Party candidate for president in 2008. And although I have criticisms of her, I did vote for her in 2008, and I stand by that choice. Scott Horton, editorial director of antiwar.com, which is a libertarian party anti-war site. Ann Wright, a peace activist and member of Code Pink, former U.S. Army colonel, resigned in opposition to the Iraq War, and she's been very active in Hawaii, where she lives, against the pollution there by the U.S. military. And she's just a very, I've listened to her talk. She's just a very gung ho, radical anti-war activist. And her organization, Code Pink, is not sponsoring this rally, and many in that organization urged its co-founder Medea Benjamin to withdraw from speaking, which she did. But Ann Wright is still speaking. Gerald Clemente, I don't know much about, but I haven't heard of him before now. Don't give me the baloney that you're making me safer by going to other countries, destroying the joint, excuse me, and then saying, I wonder why they hate us. Who made up this thing about the United States advancing democracy while robbing us of all our rights at home? Sounds good to me. Chris Hedges, well-known left-wing author and political commentator. Most of you know who he is. There's no doubt that about his anti-war credentials whatsoever. Same with Roger Waters, co-founder of the popular rock band sorry, I'm confusing with Code Pink, Pink Floyd. And he's been a solid anti-war and all-around progressive activist for many years. This is a British rock group. Roger currently lives in the United States and is very active on the U.S. political scene, and um, brings his politics into his concerts. And he recently gave a speech at the UN denouncing the U.S. backing for the Ukraine war, but also he's actually a critic of the Russian uh, military operation in Ukraine. So he just wants there to be a ceasefire. David Swanson, anti-war activist, executive director of World Beyond War, which let's see, did I thought I uh, anyway, World Beyond War. I haven't heard much about it before, but it looks like a good group, and I'll leave a link for it in the video description. Daniel McAdams, another member of the Libertarian Party, executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. Garland Nixon, radio talk show host and political analyst in Washington, D.C. Max Blumenthal, editor-in-chief at the Gray Zone, an award-winning journalist and author. Anya Parampil, Max's wife, and another journalist with the Gray Zone. The Gray Zone has done a lot of good work on events in Latin America and Syria and Israel and many other places, and they've done a lot of good coverage of the war in Ukraine, interviewing many people from Ukraine, including the Donbass region that has been, unfortunately, the victim of this civil war that's been going on for since 2014. And I should mention, one of my criticisms of some of these people, and by some of these people I am referring to Garland Nixon, Max Blumenthal, and Anya Parampil, as well as Jimmy Dore, is they've sort of gotten caught up in kind of anti-vax, COVID conspiracy theories. And as you know, if you watch this show, I think there's just a lack of understanding of the science behind vaccines and masks and many other measures to contain COVID and of the severe threat that it's posed to us over the last 3 years. And I think that's unfortunate that these folks have gone down that route, and incidentally, it's a route that has been documented by a number of independent journalists. Is one that's dominated in terms of funding and organizing and activism by the political right in this country. My colleague Bob Sinclair and I conducted some research, as have many other people, that showed that overwhelmingly the least likely people to be vaccinated or to wear masks or to take COVID seriously are Republicans or voters for Donald Trump, who himself is vaccinated and pro-vax, but a lot of his supporters aren't. But anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent on that. Tara Reid, author, actress, former Senate aide to Joe Biden, producer of the Kim Iverson Show. I know Tara. I've talked to her some, and as you may know, if you know who she is, well, you almost certainly know if you know who she is. She was one of several women that alleged that Joe Biden had engaged in sexual misconduct against them. Tara herself was one of the people who accused Joe Biden of actual rape, sexual assault against her when she was a congressional aide to him. But she's been a political activist for a long time. Used to be a diehard Democrat, as she was when she was a Senate aide, but has since become radicalized. Diane Sayre is a recent independent candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, and there's a lot of controversy around her because she is one of the members of the LaRouche organization, who, I mean, to be honest, there's an awful lot of stances they take that I don't agree with. Some I do agree with, and one of them is that they've been very outspoken critics of the Ukraine war. A couple of other people in the, or several other people in the LaRouche organization, which let's see, I'm blanking on the name. Oh, the Schiller Institute, I think, is what it's called. They have disrupted speeches by members of Congress, such as AOC, President Joe Biden, many other politicians, including former Trump administration official Mike Pompeo. Trump himself has criticized the Ukraine war, by the way. Claims that if he were still president, he would end it. But who knows? Gosh, I'm sorry about this cough. Allergies are acting up. Jill Stein, former Green Party candidate for president in 2012 and 2016. And, I really like Jill. There's no doubt whatsoever she is against U.S. imperialism and war. Dan McKnight, I don't really know. Tatiana Moroz, I didn't know before this event was announced. She's a libertarian, but she's written a fair bit of music, critical of the U.S. War machine. Jordan Page, another libertarian person, and I've heard that he's apparently a member of the Oath Keepers, which is definitely a right-wing group. But like Tatiana, who he's performed with, he's a musician who has been a critic of the U.S. war machine. Says they're anti-war music artist. Took a look at some of his stuff, and has indeed got a track record of being an anti-war person. Kim Iverson, another person who I have a fair bit of political disagreements with, although I would say she's more to the left, but kind of a mixed bag politically compared to say Jordan Page. But she is definitely against this war and against the U.S. war machine generally. Jackson Hinkle, same deal. He has taken a lot of controversial stands on some issues, but and he's been accused of being pro-war because he does, in fact, very straightforwardly say, I support the Russian military operation in Ukraine. So, he's been called pro-war and a warmonger and so forth by critics of the march. Why are you having this Putin supporter, this pro-war person in an anti-war rally? Well, I mean, the answer is, as I'll discuss in detail a little later, he believes, and I tend to agree with him, Russia really ultimately had no choice after so many attempts to achieve peace failed. And upon request from the people of the Donbass region who were under siege for 8 years by the Ukrainian government. Russia intervened, and there's been a lot of debate about the legality of that intervention and so forth. But people in the Donbass were largely grateful about it, and recently referenda were held in Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics to Donbass regions, as well as two other regions of Ukraine to formally join Russia. And there was a very large turnout, and there was overwhelming support. Certainly, you could say, well, it was during a war, and some people had fled from the region. Certainly, that's true. But there were many people still there, and they did vote to do this. Craig Jardula, anti-war activist, co-host of the YouTube show The Convo Couch. Another person, I have some disagreements with him. He's kind of a left libertarian, but I don't question his anti-war credentials. He's been a very outspoken critic of U.S. imperialism. Wyatt Reed and Dan Cohen are both journalists and have done a lot of coverage of the war in Ukraine. Wyatt Reed, I don't know about Dan Cohen, but Wyatt Reed has spent a lot of time in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region, doing live on-the-ground reporting, including from the front lines of the war. Okay, well, who are these critics? Here's one. Alex Suarez, co-founder of Hands Off Venezuela, said Jill Stein attending a rally with climate deniers is like a Holocaust survivor attending a rally with Holocaust deniers. This is actually happening. We are in the twilight zone. And so my response to that was, step right up and get your free purity test. Agreed not to attend the February 19th anti-war rally, and Alex will certify you as pure. Hooray for purity. And what he's referring to, I assume, is that a few of the speakers, or a couple of the speakers, most notably Diane Sayre, actually I'm not sure who else, but Diane Sayre from the Schiller Institute, doesn't believe climate change is a serious threat. And I definitely disagree with that, as do most of the other speakers. So Alex here doesn't seem to realize almost all of them are big advocates of climate change action. In fact, Tulsi Gabbard is the only member of Congress, because AOC's legislation on climate change was was not a bill. It was just I forget what they call legislation that's not a bill. But anyway, Tulsi Gabbard introduced a very comprehensive bill to address climate change that would have done a lot had it passed or even been taken seriously at all, including by AOC, which it wasn't. But Alex chooses to ignore this. Okay, so I got a lot of pushback from critics of the anti-war rally. When Max Blumenthal attended a Nazi anti-vax rally, Chris Richards says, you knew it was a Nazi rally. Why are you pretending this Nazi rally is something different? Well, Chris, I never said that he's referring to the Washington demonstration against vaccine and I guess also mask mandates that took place, I believe it was year before last. And that's certainly something that was, as I mentioned earlier, largely supported by people on the right, libertarians and you know, outright far right people. Charles Koch, the chief owner of Koch Industries, oil manufacture refineries, oil company, uh, has been a major funder of anti-vax and COVID minimizing, general COVID measure minimizing, anti-mask and so forth policy. He's funded a lot of people who take that perspective, like the people at the Brownstone Institute, which is heavily funded by Koch, who you know wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, basically saying, let COVID rip, except for elderly people. And certainly I'm very much against all of that. Um, as you know, if you've watched this show before, but I never said, Chris, that this was a Nazi rally. There were many people, including some of the people who were speaking at this event, like Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore, who attended that rally and are definitely not fucking Nazis. Come on, there are many people who uh, buy into these ideas that the vaccine against COVID or all vaccines are bad, and they're not necessarily right wingers. It varies. Um, and we already went through the speakers list. This is definitely not a list of Nazis. So I just think this is just ludicrous hyperbole that bears no relationship to reality, and I mean, it's just kind of sectarian. Pat yourself on the back, grandstanding, as far as I'm concerned. That does not, in any way, shape, or form, help us build an anti-war movement. Garrett Wasserman, who was until recently the co-chair of the Green Party, and he follows me on Twitter, and I follow. Well, I'm still following him so far. He also is one of the people who's been extremely critical of the march. He says it's sad to see so many repeating Democrat talking points of, quote, purity. They use the same argument to say you should accept warmonger corporatist Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, right? Purity is their way of pulling conversation to the right wing. Please stop. Well, Garrett, I'm not a fucking Democrat. I've been a supporter of the Green Party for probably a hell of a lot longer than you have, because judging from your picture, I'm a lot older than you are. I ran for Congress as a Green Party candidate in 2002. I supported Jill Stein and Ralph Nader and so on and so forth, every Green Party candidate, except the ones in 2004 who were nobodies and sucked up to Democrats, but we won't get into that. But anyway, what I said from my other accounts was, if he were a Democrat, uh, he being Bernie Sanders. Oh, wait, who? I'm not sure who I'm referring to. But anyway, uh, gosh, I don't know who he is here. But anyway, uh, if he were a Democrat, um, Alex, maybe, uh, he'd be cheerleading for the Ukraine war like Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, who, I hate to say it if you're not familiar with this, but Bernie Sanders is generally pretty terrible on foreign policy. He voted for the Iraq war in the early 1990s. He voted for sanctions and bombing of Iraq. He voted for the Afghanistan war. He supported war, the U.S. intervention in Syria, in Libya, in Israel. Um, which, by the way, unfortunately, so did Tulsi Gabbard, so that's one of my issues with her. Um, and, of course, the Ukraine war. Every single Democrat in Congress, has backed the Ukraine war. Um, Zaina Day, former People's Party uh, activist who left the People's Party because she alleges, and I'll take her uh, at her word, that Nick Brana, who is the founder of the People's Party, which is organizer of this event, sexually assaulted her. Uh, and, okay, I support an investigation of that, and that justice be done. But here she is condemning, and she's made many, many tweets about this, condemning the march outright and calling it right wing and so forth. She says, of what I said, this reminds me of when I got piled on for calling out AOC for giving to corporate Democrats, and people were so mad at me for pointing out what she did. She broke her core promises, and people were calling my valid criticisms purity test. Accountability is important. Well, for Jill Stein to speak at an anti-war rally, spoken at by libertarians and so forth, organized by Nick Brana and others who, understandably, she doesn't like Nick Brana. Okay, fine, but you know, uh, it's not the same thing as giving money to corporate warmongering Democrats or to voting for the war in Ukraine, as AOC has done, voting to fund the war in Ukraine, voting to fund fucking Nazis. So come on, these are not the same thing. Um, oh, I wanted to show. Jordan Page has been accused of being, um, you extreme right winger, and as I said, um, yeah, from what I can gather, and this is an article from Wikipedia, thoroughly establishment uh, media outlet, uh, encyclopedia outlet. Some of his early music is critical of United States foreign policy, especially the interventionism of the Bush administration. Page's music instead advocates a policy of peace and non-interventionism. His song "War Machine" specifically alludes to the military industrial complex. Page's music is also uh, taken up the theme of support for civil liberties. Um, I'm sorry, even according to Wikipedia, who I have all kinds of political disagreements with, and certainly am far to the left of the people who write political articles on Wikipedia, or articles about political figures. You know, even they say he's a peace activist. Uh, I did a little research on this person from the Green Party, Garrett Wasserman, um, and I don't have time to go into a lot of it, but um, where's the one I wanted to show you? He says, in a recent speech, Putin accused the West of moving towards open Satanism, citing the promotion of gay and transgender rights in Europe as an example. And he's claiming that a motivation for Russia's intervention in Ukraine was that the Russian government doesn't like uh, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender rights. And it is certainly true that there is Russia at the moment has not been very hospitable for the rights of gay people and so forth. And I'm very critical of them for that. My own dad was gay, as well as several friends I've had over the years. So I'm certainly a strong supporter of gay rights, and I don't like the fact that, for example, Russia just still doesn't hasn't legalized gay marriage, and is a bit behind the times on uh, uh, GLBT issues. But that's just ludicrous to claim that this is a motivation for Russia's intervention in Ukraine. I mean, we can have a look at the speech that uh, Garrett is referring to that Putin gave. It was a speech about the signing of treaties on accession of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics and the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions of Ukraine to Russia. And so he spoke at length about the referendums that were held there, where between 85 and 97, I think it was, percent, depending on which region it was, voted to join Russia, and these were referenda that were organized by the adult citizens of these regions. They weren't organized by Russia, and then there had to be legislation passed in Russia to accept the votes of people in these regions to do that. And you can certainly debate about whether this was an appropriate time in the middle of a war to hold the referenda, but people there have said, and I've seen interviews with many of them, that look, Crimea's been at peace for the entire time they've been part of Russia since 2014. You know, at first, many years ago, I wasn't interested in joining Russia. Some of them say that, but they've suffered from war. Living in a war-torn region for 9 years, and they're tired of it, and they saw this as a way out. To have protection from the far right and violent government of Ukraine. And so, in this speech, Putin emphasizes that people in these regions have an inherent right to self-determination, and they voted. In fact, I voted back in 2014 in Donetsk and Luhansk to leave Ukraine. Not at that time to join Russia, but basically what they saw with the coup in Maidan, the coup in Kiev that overthrew the elected government in 2014, and a government came to power that was very violent and anti-Russian, and they voted to leave Ukraine at that time, and that just made the government of Ukraine mad, and there's been war there ever since, despite efforts at peace treaties. Okay, so this is a long speech by Putin. He talked about a lot of stuff. Most of it about events that have taken place in the Donbass region over the last 8.5 years it was at this time, and for 8 long years, he says, people in Donbass were subjected to genocide. A human rights report by the UN found that there were 14,000 deaths over those 8 years between 2014 and 2022. A criminal policy was pursued to cultivate hatred for Russia, for everything Russian. Now, too, during the referendums, the Kiev regime threatened school teachers, women who worked in election commissions, with reprisals and death. Kiev threatened millions of people who came to express their will with repression. And of course, in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into details, but I have seen many interviews with people who talk about how they have been threatened, and there has been shelling of areas by the Ukrainian military of areas where the voting was taking place, and that's just part and parcel of how they've lived for the years since 2014, and they wanted to get away from it. We call on the Kiev regime to immediately cease fire and all hostilities, to end the war it unleashed back in 2014, and return to the negotiating table. We are ready for this, as we have said more than once. So, I mean, it goes on in that vein. Yeah, doesn't talk about gay rights at all. And one part that Alex is referring to is basically, Putin is, and many people in Russia are opposed to pressuring kids to think that they were born the wrong sex, and to undergo surgery or hormone therapy to, as they say, transition from male to female in terms of their appearance, because transgender people feel that they are actually that's the opposite sex gender roles suits them better. Okay, that's his opinion, but most of the speech has nothing to do with that, and this is just a misrepresentation on Alex's part of the motivation for Russia's intervention in Ukraine, and what Putin talked about in this speech. Speaking of which, let's talk briefly about that. Just very briefly, back in 2014, there was a violent coup in Ukraine that overthrew the elected government. It was backed by the United States. Victoria Nuland and many U.S. officials were there when it was happening and supported it. The coup was led by far-right fascistic forces. Literally supporters of the Bandera movement, the organization of Ukrainian nationalists that collaborated in the Holocaust in World War II. And actually, I didn't even know this till I started researching for an article, but 1/4 of the Jews killed during the Holocaust lived in Ukraine. Between Bandera and his followers, who were Nazis, and the Nazis from Germany, it's like 25% of the victims of the Holocaust were killed in Ukraine, which is more than were killed in Germany. And these people that have, despite their poor election results, have come to occupy high places in the Ukrainian government and military, including the head of the Ukrainian military, General Zaluzhny. He's a supporter of Bandera. He's got a portrait of Stefan Bandera, the leader of the Ukrainian Nazis during World War II, on his wall. Bandera's birthday is a national holiday in Ukraine. Has been since like the early 2010s, celebrated by the Ukrainian parliament, which tweeted an image of Zaluzhny posing under the portrait of Bandera that he has in his office. um, and it's just been a horror show in Ukraine for ever since 2014. Just a campaign of assassination and torture and murder and imprisonment of anybody who's critical of the government, of people merely for being ethnic Russians in some cases, and definitely people who are communists. As you probably know, fascists don't like communists, and in country after country, violence against communists has been the pattern from fascist governments, and that's been happening in Ukraine. Um, and Zelensky is actually the president of Ukraine at the moment. Is actually ethnically Jewish, although I don't think he's practicing, and ethnically Russian. But he's when he campaigned for office, he ran on a campaign of peace and promised other good things. And it's debatable to what extent this was a result of political pressure, but he hasn't kept any of his promises. The election of Zelensky has done nothing to change the character of the Ukrainian regime. The Zelensky government has repeatedly threatened to invade Crimea, whose citizens first voted for independence from Ukraine in 1991, when it was still part of the Soviet Union, which Ukraine used to be part of when that existed. And then they voted to join Russia in 2014, overwhelmingly, something like 96%. Um, and since Russia launched its military operation intervening in the Ukrainian civil war, Russian prisoners of war have been repeatedly tortured by Ukrainian forces, such as being deliberately shot in the legs, having their eyes gouged out, as well as killed. All of these, of course, are war crimes, violations of the rules of war. Civilians who've merely accepted food rations from Russian troops have been massacred by Ukrainian security forces for being, quote, collaborators. The Ukrainian government maintains a kill list, which lists people, foreign as well as domestic, targeted for their assassination because of their opposition to the Ukrainian government or to its war, and they've actually killed Russian journalist and academic Daria Dugina, Italian journalist Andrea Roscelli, and many Ukrainians who oppose them, including mayors of towns. Roger Waters, one of the speakers at this march tomorrow, is on that kill list. They've threatened Roger Waters, the famous musician and activist, with death for being a critic of the Ukrainian government. Even though, as I said, he's also a critic of the Russian intervention. Ukrainian troops have been deliberately targeting civilians in the Donbass region, who are mostly of Russian descent, for almost 9 years now. So every few days, if not more often, Ukraine will launch artillery shells and missiles and so forth into the middle of large cities in the Donbass region, Donetsk, for example, just right smack in the middle of downtown. No military targets anywhere near there. You can find lots and lots of documentation of this, of the destruction and killing, and interviews with people. As I mentioned, there's been a human rights report that reported that there have been 14,000 people killed in that region over the course of the 8-year civil war leading up to the Russian intervention. And some people have called that genocide. Folks within the Ukrainian government, an advisor to President Zelensky, as well as Ukrainian news commentators, have openly called for genocide against Russians. And so when people say, well, the speakers at this rally are, pro-war, or some of them are. What exactly are people supposed to do in this situation where the Ukrainian government won't leave them alone and has threatened to attack Crimea? which has been part of Ukraine, excuse me, part of Russia since 2014, when the citizens voted to leave Ukraine and join Russia, and Russia, you know, passed legislation annexing Crimea, and Crimea has actually been part of Russia uh, for most of its history, including both during the time of the Soviet Union. Citizens there in Crimea voted to leave Ukraine first back in 1991. This didn't just happen in 2014. They wanted to be out of Ukraine for a long time. Um, and they were part of Russia and not part of Ukraine for most of Crimea's history. Um, you might be curious what Russians think about uh, the war in Ukraine. Is there a big anti-war movement there? What do they know about what's going on? Are they brainwashed like people in the U.S. were for some of the wars in the early 2000s? Well, they know what's going on because many of them have relatives in eastern Ukraine. The eastern part of Ukraine has a very large ethnically Russian population. There are, in fact, many citizens of Russia, dual citizens of Ukraine and Russia. Well, now they're just Russian citizens, I guess. But in any case, uh, people in Russia and Ukraine have sort of a very fraternal relationship. There's a lot of similarities in their cultures, but there's been this hatred of Russians promoted largely in Western Ukraine by the Bandera folks, the Nazis or neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Anyway, Gonzalo Lira, who's a Chilean American who's been living in Kiev, excuse me, in Kharkiv, Ukraine, in sort of the semi-eastern part of Ukraine for quite some time, uh, and has a YouTube channel and talks a lot about events in Ukraine. He posted a thread where he said, I've been talking to a number of acquaintances in Russia. These are well-educated professionals who speak English fluently, many of whom have lived and worked in the U.S. and Europe. Some are highly critical of Putin, and some were very much opposed to the special military operation, which is what Russia called its intervention that started in February because they only sent a contingent of something like 150,000 troops, and their main objectives were to basically protect the Donbass region. Their stated objectives, and we can argue sometime about whether there's more to it than that, but that was their main objective that they stated: protect the Donbass, protect Crimea, and in accordance with that objective, demilitarize and denazify Ukraine to the extent that they could, because um, as it stood, the Ukrainian government was motivated and able to keep, violently attacking the Donbass region, as they had been for 8 years, and they had also threatened to attack Crimea, and are still threatening to attack Crimea. So basically, because there's been persistent refusal to seek peace, although I should qualify that by saying that there were very serious negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in really from the start of the military operation on February 24th all the way until very early April, that looked like they were headed for some sort of agreement that would have kept um, the Donbass region part of Ukraine, but with autonomy, like they had been asking for all along, and a ceasefire, and both sides pulling their troops back, um, and so on and so forth. And they were on the verge of reaching some sort of agreement, but um, uh, it's been alleged by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who was involved in some of those negotiations, and by other people that the United States and the UK, in the person primarily of Boris Johnson, who visited Zelensky, uh, president of Ukraine, in Kiev in late March, early April. They pressured Ukraine to pull out of the peace talks, which they did, and to refuse to negotiate any further. And that's what's been happening, which has been a very tragic thing. So many people, particularly Ukrainian troops, uh, have been killed. It's definitely more than 100,000, likely more than 200,000, and countless more than that. Seriously wounded on the Ukrainian side during this conflict. And okay, let me go on with what Gonzalo found out from the people that he talked to in Russia. Well-educated professionals who speak English fluently, or some are highly critical of Putin, and many very much opposed to a special military operation. They are universally shocked at the racist Russophobia from Europe, especially. I thought they were our friends and partners, is a common complaint. And if you don't know what he's talking about, um, well, look around at just like the censorship of Russian culture, and there have been firings of Russian musicians. Russian tennis players were banned from Wimbledon last year, and so on and so forth. And in Germany in particular, lots of abuse of ethnic Russians who live there. They don't understand why Europe destroyed its own economy with the sanctions. Uh, so basically, what happened with the sanctions is Europe, which is very dependent on Russia for natural gas and to some extent on oil, among many other sanctions that were imposed, they sanctioned Russian oil and wouldn't, at least not directly, buy it anymore. And Russia was a source of very cheap natural gas for Europe. That was a linchpin of their economic success, particularly Germany, which gets more than most European countries from Russia. Um, and so that was all cut off, particularly after the Nord Stream pipelines were blown up, but even before then. And it's wreaked havoc on Europe's economy. People are paying just impossible amounts for their energy bills, as a result of they're not having cheap natural gas anymore. Uh, they don't understand why the Germans are not reacting to the Nord Stream terrorist attack. They see it as self-evident that the Americans did it, an act of war by one of Germany's supposed closest allies. They have zero trust in the Europeans because of the Russophobia and the revelations about in details of the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. According to an anonymous inside source in the U.S. Government, were reported by famous Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh in a recent article. Um, Francois Hollande, former president of France, and Angela Merkel, former prime minister of Germany, have publicly bragged about how the Minsk agreements were entered into to buy time to arm the Ukrainian coup regime. And recently, Zelensky admitted the very same thing, that Ukraine had no intention of honoring the Minsk agreements. The same was said by former President Petro Poroshenko, former Ukrainian president. This has had a huge impact on them, so they won't accept any negotiations or ceasefire. They all think Russia would be played for fools again by the West. In other words, there were the Minsk agreements, which were promptly violated, and peace talks that took place in last March were sabotaged. There was also a draft of treaties that would have, if agreed to, resolve the hostilities and produced disarmament on the part of Russia and Europe and the United States, um, proposed by Russia back in December of 2021. That was all ignored. Um, so, uh, a lot of people in Russia and most of the Russian public, according to opinion polls, both support Putin and support Russia's military operation because they've seen what's happening uh, in Ukraine and on the part of the West, and they don't trust the United States or the West, or certainly the far right regime in Ukraine. Even the Doves believe that the conflict can only end in total victory, i.e., complete military occupation of Ukraine. They don't look forward to this because, like I said, there's a very fraternal relationship between Russians and Ukrainians for the most part. Some Ukrainians hate Russians, but not most of them. Um, but they believe it is the only solution to guarantee Russian safety. In other words, they believe that Ukraine is being used as a tool by the United States and NATO to wage a campaign to destabilize Russia. Which there have been other components of that, such as blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which obviously also sabotages Germany as well as Russia. The sanctions, the strictest in the world against Russia, and that's been that way even before the war. Um, there was a RAND Corporation report released in 2019 that listed a whole bunch of ways that could be used to destabilize and perhaps produce a regime change in Russia, and they were very much in favor of this. Dick Cheney has also talked about his desire to see Russia like couped and it's the Russian state basically dismembered so that Western corporations could exploit it. Great guy, that Dick Cheney. Um, they all view this conflict as a Russia versus NATO war, not just Russia versus Ukraine. They all believe this war will last for years. There's a palpable sense of determination and relief that they too, like their grandfathers before, are involved in an existential war for the survival of their nation. As you may know, Russia or the Soviet Union really suffered more than any other country at the hands of the Nazis during World War II. More than 25 million people in Russia were, and other USSR republics were killed or died for various reasons as a result of the war. Um, and so it really was a war at that time, World War II, or the Great Patriotic War, as it's called in Russia, for the survival of Russia. They one and all despised the Russians who fled to Europe, Israel, and Georgia. They viewed them as fair weather friends at best, traitors at worst. They all made it clear that they would not be welcomed back at the end of this conflict. Even the, quote, doves respect Putin, and they laugh at the idea of, quote, regime change in Russia. The principal criticism of Putin, actually, is that he's been too gentle, too patient. Many, but not all, would prefer a scorched earth total war campaign, specifically targeting the Kiev leadership. So, in other words, calling for Zelensky's government to be overthrown. And the reason why folks have criticized Putin is that in Russia is that, contrary to popular belief, Putin did not willingly, go into Ukraine. He tried to, and his governing party resisted direct military intervention in the Ukraine war for 8 years, and of course there was some pretty small, from what I can gather, military aid to the militias in the Donbass region, the Donetsk and Luhansk militaries that were trying to fight off the Ukrainian army, but not intervention on a major scale. There were definitely no Russian troops in the Donbass region at any point before February 24th, 2022, unless they were, in which there were some, a few people from Russia involved for intervening in the Donbass long before Putin did. They called for there to be an invitation given to the people of Donetsk and Luhansk to join Russia, which obviously would have precipitated direct military conflict between Russia and the Ukrainian government. Given that Ukraine considers that region part of Ukraine. Um, all in all, Gonzalo goes on to say they, his Russian friends, are satisfied with their leadership. You know, Lavrov was universally praised. Peskov was one least respected. Lavrov is the Russian foreign minister, the equivalent of the U.S. Secretary of State. Shoigu, Gerasimov, and Surovikin, who were generals in the Russian military, were all endorsed, although they took some criticism, mostly because they think the war is going too slowly. Interestingly, I sensed a gnawing anxiety over Russia's economy, which seems to be going so well, as if it's too good to be true. The 2015 sanctions nearly broke their economy, but now, with even worse sanctions, none are experiencing a loss of standard of living. And that came as a real surprise to observers on both sides of the conflict that uh, these draconian economic sanctions against Russia have really not done that much to affect Russia's economy. Because Russia had done a lot through its alliances with many non-Western countries, principally China, but many others. They have forged a independent economic path, and Russia is the most natural resource rich country in the world, and they've fully taken advantage of that. So, the irony is that the very countries that have imposed these sanctions on Russia, basically all the NATO countries and the United States, and a couple of countries in the Far East, I guess, Australia and Japan, um, you know, uh, they've been hurt the most, particularly European countries, by the sanctions. Um, People are really going through hell economically in Western Europe right now, but not in Russia. They seem to have lost their respect, admiration, and fear of the West, certainly their trust. They all believe that human rights, democracy, etc., are empty platitudes the West uses to get its way. They see the West as a paper tiger run by fools and degenerates. This is inevitably a very biased selection of opinions. Highly educated, well traveled, Western oriented, fairly well to do people aged 27 to 60. So imagine, he says, how much more conservative Russian working class people's opinions would be. Food for thought. Um, and I question his statement there. He's actually, although very critical of U.S. foreign policy, he's politically conservative for the most part himself. So it seems like he's kind of projecting that onto Russian people here. But um, you know, obviously many members of the Russian working class support the Communist Party, the number two party in Russia's parliament, the Duma. So a lot of them certainly are not conservative. Um, Addendum, I forgot to include this point, which is true of popular sentiment in Russia generally. This person says the only point missing is that they, Russians, consider Ukrainians truly as their own brothers and sisters, as I said, and are deeply affected by this bloodshed, suffering as much as those of Russians. Normal Ukrainians are fighting for a cause for their country, but have been duped by their own government. Um, so, let's see, how long have I been going on here? Well, gosh, an hour and 20 minutes. I don't want to go on too much longer, but you just want to say, you um, there's been a lot of criticism of this protest that's taking place tomorrow, but in my opinion, there are a lot of good speakers. There's a lot of positive energy involved, and a lot of people who I respect are attending or speaking, who are certainly not warmongers and are very much supporters of the attempts that have been made to seek peace in you know, this conflict for many years now. Um, and uh, yeah, at the same time, I have some criticisms of uh, the march. Like I said, I don't agree with the politics at all of except for the criticism of the U.S. war machine, of some of the speakers, and I disagree with certain political views of most of them. But you know, on this issue and on U.S. foreign policy in general, from what I can tell, every single one of the speakers who I'm familiar with, are very solid on the vast majority of U.S. foreign policy issues. I did mention a couple of issues where there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, these are people who want this war to stop. Um, and you know, uh, at the same time, this is, although a very politically diverse group of speakers, and undoubtedly very diverse group of protesters who will be attending. Um, I wouldn't say it's a representative sample of anti-war sentiment in this country. There have been criticisms from Jill Stein, one of the speakers, running mate in the 2016 presidential election, Jamu Buraka, and a number of other uh, well-known people on the left, the young black activists at Revolutionary Black Network, and a number of others have pointed out that um, basically there was, and it's understandable because of who organized the march, but there's been a strong bias in terms of what speakers were invited toward people who were connected with either the Libertarian Party or the People's Party. Jimmy Dore and I believe Chris Hedges and some of the other speakers are on the board of the uh, People's Party, and obviously many of the speakers are connected with the Libertarians in some way. And, there weren't invitations given to uh, speakers for the most part from the Black Alliance for Peace or a number of radical black activists who are well known and very strong anti-war activists were not invited, and just in general, a number of folks that one would hope would be there are missing, and yeah. I don't think it's, even though I've been very critical of leftist sectarians who have uh, trashed this march as a Nazi march, as that one guy said, or as just having very problematic politics. Some of the other critics have said, and that it shouldn't be supported and so forth. Um, I think that's counterproductive, but I also think it's counterproductive in the other direction, where somebody, for example, is a communist, and libertarians don't want to invite them because of that. Well, that's not good either. And there's been some of that, and there's actually another anti-war march being organized for about a month from now by people from um, uh, Code Bank, uh, Black Veterans for Peace, I believe, is one of the other main organizers. A number of socialist political organizations. I'm not sure who else is sponsoring it. I'd have to look that up, and I don't want to take time doing that right now. But you know, I think we all need to work together on this. There's nothing more important than stopping this horrific violence that's happening in Ukraine. And again, it has to be done in a way that provides a permanent solution to the problem that addresses the concerns of uh, you know, ethnic Russians and Russia itself and leftists in Ukraine who've been so persecuted by the Ukrainian government and everyone else. And there need to be some steps taken to demilitarize the region and make some you know, like negotiate a real comprehensive peace treaty that ends NATO and um, you know, meets all these demands. No more military aid for Ukraine. A comprehensive set of negotiations. Address the economic issues that have resulted from this conflict. Disband NATO, as I said. Global nuclear de-escalation. Cut military spending instead of raising it every year. Abolish the CIA. Etc. These are reasonable demands that this march is making. I'm sure the other march will also have very reasonable, progressive, just, and peace-seeking demands. And I support both marches, and I urge you to as well, to also support the many other actions that have been taking place to try and get our country to stop stop supporting this horrific violence taking place in Ukraine. All right. Well, again, the march tomorrow is taking place at 12:30. Hopefully, if you're seeing this before then, you will make an effort to tune in if you're not able to go. And then there's another march, another protest against the war in Ukraine. I forget the exact date, but it's within the next month or so. I believe it's taking place on the anniversary of the launching of the U.S. war in Iraq. And I urge you to pay attention to that march as well and attend it if you can. And look for anti-war activism in your community and organize it if you can, because there's nothing more important than not blowing up the damn planet or inflicting horrible, unnecessary violence on innocent people, as is taking place in Ukraine right now. All right, I will